Yeah, I want you to know that no matter what, I've been blessed. I want you to know that the testimony that I'm going to give may be upsetting sometimes, but in my life as a whole, I have been big time blessed. Big time. So I want you to understand it right out the gate as I get started with this. Suzanne made me write stuff down. I know my testimony, but she still told me I need to write it down. I want to read you something starting out that I think is really good. And it's about testimonies because a lot of times it's hard to get somebody to give their testimony. A lot of people don't want to do it. They're nervous. But you don't have to be nervous. Hang on, I'll get it back up. Because God will be with you. And it's really important. Because we go through things that, through my life, it was amazing that I would hear someone testify to something that was going on in their life, and it would help me at times. And I didn't grow up in a family that went to church. I didn't even know God till I was about 10 years old. I knew of God, and I said, let me change that. I knew of God, that there was a God, just through people talking. But I didn't know God until I met Suzanne. And so I knew God. And that's something we have to look at and understand, that it's not good enough to know Him. I mean, you've got to be a child of God. And you can know God your whole life. Or let me change that. Know of God. You can know of God and that He exists. But until you make that move in your life to commit to Him, then you truly know God. You know, it's not doing anything in your life. So that's what I hope through testimony, that it helps people to understand, you know, what He's there for, what He can do in your life. The things you'll go through in life, some are tougher for some than others, but to any degree, He's there for you through it all. So let me read this. Sharing our testimony serves several important purposes in the context of faith and personal growth. Giving thanks and praise to God. When we share our personal testimony, we express gratitude for God's work in our lives. It's a way to acknowledge His faithfulness and give Him glory. Encouraging ourselves. By recounting our journey, we remind ourselves of how far we've come and the transformative power of God's grace. Our testimony becomes a source of encouragement and motivation for our ongoing spiritual walk. Number 3, it says, comforting others. Our stories can bring comfort and hope to those facing similar struggles. When we share our experiences, we let others know they're not alone and that God can work miracles even in challenging circumstances. Number 4, passing on an inheritance. Just as previous generations have shared their testimonies, we continue this legacy by passing down stories of God's goodness. These narratives shape our identity and help future generations understand who God is and what He has done. And the last one, it says, being a witness. Our testimonies serve as a powerful witness to God's presence and work in our lives. As we share, we become living examples of His loving grace, inviting others to encounter Him too. And so I wanted to say that first, and now I'm going to get started in my testimony. I grew up in Texas. As a kid, I was born in Abilene, Texas. Let me get these off because I can't see y'all with them on. And I was the youngest of 4 sons to my mom and dad, Billy Ray and Hattie Lee Henderson. And from the very beginnings of my memory, I remember my father coming home every single day of his life. He worked. My father was a hard-working man. In fact, he attained, quite a bit of up the ladder, we'll say, in what he did. He was in construction. But I can remember from my first beginnings that he would come home every single day at 10 or 10:30 at night. He got off at 5, but he would go straight to the bar. And so he would come home drunk every day. He was an alcoholic, and he drank weekends. So I don't never know him of not being drunk at some point during a day. And so as I guess around 4, my mom was also an alcoholic, and she determined to go to Alcoholics Anonymous and quit doing it. And it was really great for me with my mom for a couple of years. She was there. I was there with her. She was there for the 4 boys. I mean, she cooked for us. She took care of us. And she was sweet. But one day, at 6 years old, for reasons that I still don't know to this day really, we were at my dad's because my mom and dad wasn't together at that point. I was 6. I didn't know why. I just knew I was at my mom's, and my dad lived across town. So we showed up at my dad's, my mom did, with us, and we walked up there. And, of course, you got to understand that my dad, to me, was somebody I just didn't want to be around. I was scared of him. I mean, 6 years old, and he was pretty mean. And so she showed up with us there, and she said, look, you're going to stay with your dad, you and Philip. Well, me and Philip were the 2 youngest. I was 6. Philip was 7, 7.5. 2 oldest boys were in high school, my older brothers. And when my mom told me that, it just absolutely ripped my heart out. I just started crying uncontrollably. I was 6 years old. I mean, you're leaving me and Philip with him? And it just blew my mind. I just could not understand it. And she just left us crying. And I'm sure she did that because she couldn't stand being there and hearing us cry, so she left. But we were with him, and he was pretty rough. And so from the age of 6, 7, we moved to a mobile home near Highlands. And at 6, 7, and 8, my dad come home every night, 10:30 drunk. We'd already be in bed because we knew to go to bed. But we were by ourselves until he got there every night at 10:30. And he left on Friday morning. He told us he wouldn't be back till Sunday night. And so he'd leave us each $10, and he would leave. And so all of my time, 6, 7, and 8 years old, we got $10 on the weekend, and he left. And we didn't know where he was, and we did what we wanted. We went to town, as crazy as it sounds. And it would scare me because my dad was a disciplinarian. And when you better say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, thank you, please, and all those things, or it was not good for you. And so, you know, all through my young life, my dad was preaching that, telling us, you're going to do this and this and this and this. You're my son, you know. So we'd leave to go to town, me and Philip would hitchhike. Boy, he'd throw that thumb right out. He was 7.5, 8, and he'd throw his thumb out. And I'd be, I ain't doing that. Well, people would stop back then just like that. If you put your thumb out when I was a kid, I'm 63, so this was a long, long time ago. But back then when you put your thumb out, people were just kind. They stopped. Now, nowadays, nobody would even think of that. How many in here would hitchhike right now? Ain't many hands going up. I understand. There's not many, but there's a reason for that. But he'd get in one every time, and I'd walk. It's 5 miles, but I walked every time. And I'd meet him, and thank God he was always there. But he'd hitchhike, and he'd tell me how stupid I was for not doing it. You're stupid. I mean, you're walking 5 miles. I don't care. I'm going to walk every time 5 miles. I'm not hitchhiking. But we went through that as kids, and then when I was about 8 years old, my dad sent us to live with his mom. My mother had one brother who was killed in a car wreck with his mom and dad, my grandmother and grandfather, before I was born. My dad was an only child. So there were no aunts, no uncles, no first cousins, nothing like that. So it was just us and his mom and dad, which my dad's dad was a good man. My grandmother was an alcoholic. I mean, she was drunk every day by 3:30, every single day. And my dad put me and Philip with her to take care of her, really. I mean, to just be there when she was going through that and this, that, and the other. So we had a rough life as a child. You know, and didn't see my dad very often once he made that move. He didn't come by very often. And my grandmother would get drunk every day. And when I was 10 years old, I came here for a summer to Jonesboro. And, man, that was a big shocker when I came to Jonesboro from Houston. I grew up in Houston, and I come to Jonesboro, and it was country, and everybody here was country. Now, I want you to know I was born a Texan, but I am a Louisianian, hardcore Louisianian. And my brother Mike, he said he was Texan till the day he died, but not me. I'm a Louisianian. So when I come here at 10, I got my first true taste of the Lord. My grandmother and grandfather lived in Hodge, and their name was Maddie and Willie Anderson. And I don't know if any of y'all know them, but they were really, really good people. And they went to North Hodge Assembly. And I was 10 years old one night, and I was at their house. And I only come for about a month. And they said, I'm going to church. We're fixing to go to church. You want to go with us? And I said, yeah, I'll go with you. I'd never been to church. I was 10 years old. So I went. It was to North Hodge Assembly. And I was sitting between both of them. My grandmother over here, which I call them my grandma and grandfather because they did more for me in my life as far as my head than anybody had ever been around. And he was over here and she was over there. Church service got started and everything was going along okay. And then my grandfather stood up and started speaking in tongues. And when I tell you he was screaming it to the rafters, it scared me to death. And then somebody else jumped up and started giving an interpretation, and it didn't matter. It still scared me to death. And so it was a while before I went back. When they'd invite me, and I'd just say, no, I don't think I'll go this evening. Because I thought, man, alive. But let me say that through them, I learned of God, and I learned about God. I didn't accept God at that time, but that's when I first had my first ideas that God was there for me, and I could be a child of His, and He would be there for me. Although I still believe through my life, when I was young, He was there. And I believe there is an age of responsibility that kids reach at some point. But God's there, and when they get to that age, then you have to seek Him out. You got to find Him. You got to give your life to Him. But because I believe I was through some things when I was young, I'm not even going to talk about because Suzanne told me not to, that was bad, really bad. You know, my dad, one night he came home at 10:30, he was drunk. I don't know, I was about 7, Phil was probably 8. And he come in our bedroom and threw the door open and said, get in here. So we started to put our pants on because we slept in our underwear. And he said, don't put your pants on, just get in here. So we went in there, and it was like 2 in the morning or something like that. It wasn't 10:30, so he was really late. And it was on a Sunday, so we knew we had to go to school. But he pointed at the refrigerator, and he said, I want to know who did that. And so we both looked at it, and the refrigerator door looked like the Jolly Green Giant had grabbed it at the bottom and top and just twisted it. And so the door would hit at the top, but it was a foot out at the bottom. Well, you're going to know if that happens. If that happens, even if your brother did it, you would know that happened. I mean, we were in the house together and both went to bed at the same time. And both of us said, I don't know. And my dad said, get back in that room and figure out who did it. And if you can't figure out which one of you did it, I'm going to beat both of you. So we went in the room, and man, all I could think of is I did not want it because it was a beating. And so Philip was sitting there, and I love my brother. You got to understand, Philip, man, he got me in some trouble, and he done some stupid things, and I was always trying to get him out of trouble. But he was just like my dad. As he grew up as a man, he really was. It turned out to be my dad made over. But he said, look, there's no sense in both of us getting a beating. But, I'll just tell him I did it. Which I was so relieved because, I was just like, oh, thank you, Lord. He's going to take the heat for this. But I knew he didn't do it. And I tried to tell my father that, and he wouldn't hear it. And he just started beating him. And he didn't have anything on but his underwear. And he beat him until he was bleeding. I was crying. I wasn't very old. And he looked at me and said, if you don't shut up crying right now, when I get through with him, I'm going to get you. So I learned to shut off the tears pretty quick when I was young. He was a mean man. And I want you to know that through love, eventually I learned that through Christ, that I was to love my father. And I did. And I honored my mother and my father, but I didn't like either one of them. And I'm going to tell you, you don't have to like them. Loving them is one thing. Liking them is another. They did not represent what I wanted my children to be like or myself. And they refused to even get close to that. My family, my parents only had kids by one child. That was me. My other 3 brothers never had children. And my mother and father never saw my children except one time my father saw my son. I offered to have them come here fly them in here, do whatever, but they wouldn't do it. They never met my kids, only grandkids they had. And so the bottom line is that I started to learn, though, about God, and I knew of God, but I decided in my life that I needed a plan. And I think everyone needs a plan. And it was for me when I was pretty young, like 14, I started mapping out what I was going to do to get out of the mess I was in. And one of the things I decided was at 12 years old, I was leaving there. I was 12. I thought in my brain I can do what I want when I turn 12. I don't know where I got that at. But I thought at 12 you could do what you want. So I called my stepfather had told me, he lived here. He lived out at Clouds Crossing with my mom and his kids. And he told me, if you ever want to come here, just give me a call and I'll be there in 6 hours. And so one day I told Philip, I'm going. I'm 12 in a few weeks and we can do what we want. And he said, are you sure? I said, yeah, I'm sure. I wasn't, but he was going where I went. So I made a call and told Jimmy, and Jimmy said, I'll be there in 6 hours. My grandmother heard me. This was the one that got drunk every day. And she said, I heard you talking to your stepfather, and I'm calling your father, and you know he's going to beat you. And I said, that's okay. I'm leaving here. And so she called him, and he showed up, and he told me, he said, so I hear you want to go stay with your mother and your stepfather. I said, yes. And he said, well, if you leave here, don't ever come back. And I said, I won't. I straight up told him at 12 years old, which I thought I was going to probably get knocked through the wall, but I said, you don't have to worry about that. I ain't coming back here. I got no reason to come back here. And so he said, okay. He didn't put a hand on me. He walked out. And that was close to the last time I ever saw my dad, except when I carried Cody one time to try to let him see his grandson, and that was a mess. But I left and I came here when I was 12, way out in the country, and we didn't have any running water for a long time, no bathroom, but it was so much better than being there. You just can't imagine. My stepfather was a man that was a recovering alcoholic. My mother was a recovered alcoholic, and he had recovered. I mean, they were both at that time not drinking. And he was from here. He grew up right there in North Hodge, and he grew up with two parents that were Christians. He knew God, and he was such a blessing in my life. He was not a Christian, as far as I know, but he was there for me all the time. He was a blessing. He did things with me and Philip. We hunted, we fished, we went and done things that didn't really cost any money because he didn't have any. But we had a single-shot shotgun. Cost $30 during that time, by the way. $30. That's all it cost for a brand new one. And fishing poles, which would be a piece of wood with a string on the end, as far as we were concerned. But the bottom line is we enjoyed doing things. And I got to know his mom and dad more. I got very close to his father, which I call my grandfather. And he lived up there in North Hodge. And I would end up going fishing with him. And me and him alone, we'd be on Doug Namona, and he would be telling me about God the whole time. God's been good to me, Johnny. I'm telling you right now. Look what he gives us. Look at all this. And he point to things around us and things that were going on. And it blew my mind. I enjoyed being with him. He was a good old man. He was old at that time, and I considered him a good old man. I mean, he just was really good to me. But I still hadn't accepted Christ in my life. But I was on that track. I went to work, was doing stuff. I mean, after school, I went to work. I worked at a couple places until I finally got on Kentucky Fried Chicken. I worked at Kentucky Fried Chicken for 3 years when I was 15, 16, 17 because my parents had nothing. They didn't have any money. So that's what I did. And the first thing I ever drove, I bought a motorcycle because it was cheap. You could get it cheap. You could put insurance on it cheap, and gas was cheap. And that's what I drove. I drove a motorcycle 3 years. I was 15, 16, and 17, and that's what I drove. That's what I got around on. You'd see me riding down the road in a storm because it's the only way I could get from A to B, and that's what I would drive on. And so I lived my life, and that was part of my plan. Get something so I can drive now, because when I turn 18, I'm going to the oil field. Well, back then, everybody was going in the oil field. I mean, I knew pretty sure I could get a job. And so I worked up until my 18th birthday and went into the oil field. And I never drank, and I never did drugs. To this day, I've never done drugs, ever. No marijuana, no drugs, no nothing. And I never drank. I didn't think I would ever drink. But I get in the oil field, and particularly in South Louisiana, everybody's, let's go get a beer. Let's go get a beer every day. I mean, that's an everyday thing down there, I tell you. Let's go get a beer. Let's go get a beer. And no, I don't drink. I'm not going to get no beer, But I'd go with them, and I'd drink a Coke. I'd get made fun of. Didn't matter. I didn't care. But I kept doing that until I was 19 years old. And at 19, for some reason, I decided one day to drink. And so I said, okay, yeah, I'll drink a beer. So I started drinking a beer, and then another one. I drank a bunch of them. I didn't get sick. I didn't have headaches. I didn't have any issues with it. And I thought I pretty well had my composure drinking. And I did that for about a year. I was drinking. And then I came back home up here. I moved back. And I was riding down the road one day, and up in Jonesboro, and I saw her. And she was coming from the tennis courts, and I said, man, that's a pretty little thing, And, and so I went after her in my truck. I had the best looking truck in Jonesboro, too, by the way. And I went after her. And she pulled into a store and got out. And she was with Regina Goss, who was Matthews at the time, before she married. And my stepbrother was in the vehicle with me, and I rolled the window down, and I said, something to her about, hey, what's your name? Suzanne Plunkett. And I said, okay, and I pulled off. I left. My stepbrother, he said, what'd you do? What'd you do that for? I said, I just wanted to find out what her name was. And, you don't want to move too fast in these situations. And I said, but I am going to talk to that girl. And I could tell I just had this thing in me, something that she was it. I mean, I really felt she was my soulmate. And I drove down the road, and I told my stepbrother, I said, you see that cooler sitting right there? And he said, yeah. I said, it's got beer in it. You want it? He said, do I want one? I said, no. Do you want all of it? He said, what do you mean? I said, I'm done. I'm never going to drink another beer. I can't drink beer and liquor and all that craziness and try to date a woman like her, because I had that much respect for her. And I knew about the family because her first cousin was my best friend in high school. She was 17, I was 20. So I kind of thought, if she finds out I'm 20, she probably ain't going to date me. But she did. And I ended up, eventually, Suzanne and I, riding and talking. And next thing you know, we were talking about how we'd raise our kids and do this. It was really just a natural evolution toward marriage. I tell people all the time, I never asked her to marry me. I didn't. It just evolved into me and her being together all the time. And next thing you know, we're talking about how we would raise our children and how we would do this or do that, And then next thing I know, she said, you're going to have to ask my dad if you can marry me. And I said, okay. And so I pulled up at her house one evening to take her out, and she got in. I said, hang on. She said, where are you going? I'll be right back. I run in the house. I knew her dad was in there. He was there every day at 3:30 or 4 o'clock, sitting there eating a candy bar and drinking a Coke. Got off at the mill. I run in there and I stuck my head around the corner. I said, hey, Merle. He said, what? I said, I want to marry Suzanne. What do you think? He said, do you love her? I said, yeah, I love her. I wouldn't want to marry her. And he said, okay. He said, well, I'm going to tell you one thing. He said, or two things. You never put a hand on her, and you do not take her out of Jackson Parish as long as I'm alive, as far as living, moving. And I thought about that one a second, and I said, okay, I can do that. He said, all right. So I run back out, got in the truck, and I said, ask your dad if I can marry you, and he told me it was all right. She said, you're lying. I said, no, I'm not lying. I said, I did it. I just worked it up and got it done. And I said, so, that's where we're at with this thing. So we got married a year later. Well, not a year. I mean, it was way after that. We got married on June 11th, 1981. 82. Well, hey, it's been a long time. My brain ain't what it was when we first got married. So anyway, she was 18 and I was 21. And I'm going to be honest with you. I never had been in a church until I started dating her. So when I started dating her, I knew, and it was selfish reasons, that I needed to go to church. So I thought, yeah, I need to go to church. A girl like her, I'm not going to be able to keep her if I don't get in church and start at least going. So I went. But then God got a hold of me, brother. And there would be times that I'd want to go down and give my life, and I wouldn't. The old devil would get in that ear. That's going to embarrass you. Don't do that. It's going to embarrass you. Don't do that. And after third, fourth time that happened, finally one Sunday, I didn't even know it till I was down there, and that's the truth. And I gave my life to the Lord, and things started to change in me. And I knew a lot about God just from listening. But I started studying God, reading the Bible, attending every Sunday school we had at our church. We had one every Sunday. And you learn a lot in Sunday schools if you listen. And so I started attending those, and I had some issues with some things. My faith for the Lord wasn't as strong as it needed to be. And so I struggled with that. I struggled with tithing. And I think I've told most people in here before. That was hard to give that money up. We struggled. We didn't have a whole lot. I was in the oil field, but when we married, every time I'd leave to go to the rig, she'd get sick. And when I say sick, I'm talking about having to be taken to the emergency room sick. She'd throw up until she couldn't stand anymore. And her mom would have to take her to the emergency room. We figured out after about the third week that it was her thinking I was going to get hurt or killed. In the oil field, back then in the oil field, I saw myself, people get killed, and it was pretty rough, but at times, but it scared her to that point. So I was back out there, and my tool pusher come and said, "Man, your wife's sick again." I know he was thinking it was all a bunch of bull, but I didn't go home when she was sick the other time, but I said, "I got to go." He said, "Well, go ahead and take care of that and get back here as soon as you can, And I said, "No, I'm done. I can't do it. She's nearly dying every time I do this, so I'm going to have to figure out something different." And so I come home, and I got a job doing hot mix roofs on buildings. Man, the oil field was tough. Until you've been on a building, it was 105 degrees outside doing a hot mix roof, pulling up 5-gallon buckets of tar by hand all day and spreading it out with a mop bigger than your body. That's tough. And we were doing it in August. And so, but that's what I did for a living for a year. But I was still on a plan, trying to figure out what I was going to do, and working through everything. And I finally got on as electrical helper after about a year, and that was my trade, the direction to go in my thinking. And so that's what I did, and I headed off in that direction. And it was great. It was the right thing for me, and I became an electrician. During that time, I was working up in Ruston. Suzanne calls me. That's back before cell phones. I told her to give me a call, or I would call her. She'd have to accept Yeah. It's been so long I forget. Most people don't know what a collect call is. So I said, "Hey, this is Johnny Henderson calling, for Suzanne," and she accepted it. And because she'd been to the doctor that day, because she told me, I don't know, but something ain't right. And so she said, when she picked it up, she said, "I'm pregnant." I said, "Wow, okay." And we had planned that after we'd been married 5 years to have children, but this was 3 years, and it just happened. And so it was great. We got through that, and we had a little girl. Her name was Danielle. Beautiful. When I say beautiful, I'm talking about the tannest little thing you've ever seen in your life. She could go out in the sun, never turn red, but that's how Suzanne is, and just get dark, just beautiful. She was so pretty. And she taught me what love really was. So Danielle taught me that. And after Danielle was going through, several months, being 1 month old, 2 months, and right in there, Suzanne kept telling me she's throwing up too much, and she's throwing up too hard. And and so our doctor kept saying she was fine. Kids throw up. It happens when they're little. And so after about 4 months, we carried her somewhere else. And we walked in and gave her to this guy, and he was checking her out. And this is no x-rays or anything. He's feeling of her stomach, and he said, "This child needs emergency surgery right now. She has a distended stomach with a blockage in her colon. She needs emergency surgery right now to remove that blockage." Woo! Me and Suzanne like to passed out. "Well, what are you talking about?" And he was that serious about it. "You got to get this child right away to somewhere," because we didn't have insurance. But we chose to stay there and pay the money that we needed to pay to get things done. And they did the surgery there. And she had a 7-inch tumor in her colon. And she was the youngest person to ever contract something called myelosarcoma, which was a cancer in the colon. Nobody had ever been that young and got it. The youngest that had ever been close to that was 7 years old, and then up to 21. No one had ever lived with it. But they told us, they said, because she contracted this so young, we are believing that she'll live. And so they removed that, of course, the colon and a big part of it. But you never knew it with her. She was just up and bouncing. I mean, it's like within 4 or 5 days, really. And so we started praying, and we would pray to God to heal her. We truly wanted healing. And through our prayers, we'd also tell God not to let her suffer. We didn't want her to suffer. She did not through that period. But we got through going back and forth, and then there was an issue with scarring in her intestines because of the first surgery. And then they went in and corrected that, and then from that, she got gangrene in the rest of her colon. And so they had to go in and take that out. And it didn't leave her very much of a colon, but she would eat, and not long after eating, she would have a bowel movement. But she was okay. You wouldn't know it by her. She was growing up and just doing things, and she would say, I love you in her little way, love you. And at 20 months old, we took her we'd been taking her to St. Jude's, but at 20 months we took her, and they told us everything looked great. And so we come home, and we didn't even get home good. They had called home and told her parents that they needed to talk to us. So we got there, we called them right back, and they said, look, we've looked again more in depth, and we believe there's tumors on her liver. And so we need to get her back here. We need to do surgery. And so we went back, and they assured us that the liver surgery was a very normal thing that happens all the time, and it's the only organ that grows back. It'll actually grow back. You cut a piece off, it grows back. And that was, like awesome to hear that, well, that's good. And they said, what they told us, they thought there was 3 tumors. So they got in and started doing surgery on her, and we were in the waiting room. Her parents were with us, and her brother and a lot of the family was with us. Jennifer, were you with us? Anyway, Jennifer was a big part of our life, always has been, so during that time and since. But that's Suzanne's first cousin, by the way. Anyway, so we were there, and I was praying to God to not let her hurt, to not let her suffer. And we got into hours, I think it was 7 hours into surgery. Wasn't supposed to take that long. They came out and they told us that they had found 5 tumors and were able to remove 3.5, and there was still 1.5 tumors they could not take out. And so what was going to happen was that those tumors would go to her brain, to her liver, to her brain, I'm sorry. So that's the move it made, from the colon to the liver to the brain. And she would die a tremendous death, a terrible, horrible death, the way they told us. But after about 10 hours, they came out and said that, they'd had trouble and there was nothing they could do to save her. She wasn't going to make it. And they said that during the surgery, they had moved her liver around, and all the vessels that attached the liver to the main artery, the big artery, had burst. They didn't realize it when they were doing the surgery because the vessels were so abnormally short. And I had been praying to God, and God had laid on my heart, the Spirit had moved on me, that before they came out and told us she wasn't going to make it, that I would have to be strong, that she wasn't going to make it. And I knew in about the 7th or 8th hour that she wasn't going to make it. The Spirit just moved on me and let me know that you got to be strong, and she's not going to make it. And I thought so that Suzanne would be that. But Suzanne had been with me praying for 20 months. And when they came and told us, Suzanne was pretty strong. But her father, anybody, I don't know if you knew him, his name was Merle Plunkett. He was an outstanding man, a good man. He couldn't understand it. His walk with God wasn't as strong as ours at the time, but he could not understand that they said it was a simple surgery and she was not going to make it. And he was begging God, just begging God to take him in her place. Please leave her. Please take me. I was pretty strong then, but it was unbelievable to see that. And we had to go to the chapel with him to settle him down. We thought he was going to have a heart attack. Literally, we thought he was fixing to die right in front of us. But he seriously wanted God to take his life to spare hers. It was just a dramatic thing in our life, and we needed God more than we ever did, and he was there. A lot of people don't understand how we did what we did to deal with that, get through that. But God was always with us, no matter what the case. And in that time of losing her, there were other people around us that were suffering with us. And the bottom line is that we have to look at it in this context of that this little girl was in our lives for 20 months. We could have had her for 0 months. And I've had people ask me about my daughter. Would you rather have her not just been there? And the answer to me is no. You don't know how awesome it was to have her for 20 months. It was phenomenal. What she taught us was phenomenal. You know, having a child is not to be taken lightly, period. Raising one is not to be taken lightly, period. But what the woman goes through when she accepts the fact that she's going to have a child, if you guys don't understand that, you need to get you a checkup from the neck up. Because they are truly saying they're going to suffer pain willingly. I don't know any guy that says that. But women do it all the time. And I have a great deal of admiration for her and what she went through. She went through throwing up every single day, every day. Every day till she had her, she'd throw up. And she's a little bitty thing and I'm not, and the baby was huge. They were always huge. And so God was with us through that. We prayed, and it wasn't long. She said, I want another child, you know. And I said, what do you want, you know? And she said, I don't care if it's a boy or girl. I never made those decisions because it was her body, not mine. So I wasn't one of these kind of guys. You're going to have me 3 kids. No, I wasn't that. Never was. It was always in her court. And 9 months later, we had a son. His name was Cody, a little boy. And understand, he was going to be the only Henderson to go on in our family because 3 brothers, none of them have kids. There's no cousins, no aunts, no uncles. So the Henderson legacy was going on with him. And so we had a boy, and I was proud of him. And he was outstanding. He moved through life and done so many things. He asked me when he was little. He wasn't very big. He was only about 5'8" at his tallest. But boy, I tell you what he didn't have in height, he made up for in so many other things. And one was strength, because he was a bull. And, you know, as he went through life, he loved athletics. He was in church all the time, every Sunday. We were at McDonald Church at that time. They did not have anything for youth. And so as Cody passed through life and he got on up in years, and playing football was his thing, and he loved it. And he loved the outdoors, fishing, doing all kinds of stuff. But as he got through life and moving on up, he come to me when he was 15, and he said, there's this church that's at the Methodist church. It's a group of people there that have church there, and it's really good. It's got a great youth thing. I'd love to go. I was a deacon at McDonald, so right off the bat, I said, no, I don't think so. I'm not going to let you go to another church while I'm a deacon here. Son, I can't do that. But our church didn't have anything going on for youth at all. So as time passed, he kept asking. And finally one day I said, look, I'll let you go on Wednesday nights. Just Wednesday nights. He started attending with these people. There's a bunch of people here that's been here since it began, but he started attending at the Methodist church with them. And I saw something in him that was amazing. He was a good kid and he loved the Lord, and he understood. He never missed a Sunday. He was always in church. But he was not pursuing God. When I say pursuing God, I'm talking about, you should have seen this kid. I mean, he loved God. He pursued God. And when he was 15, he started here, and I don't know how long he had been here, but I'm going to read you something that we found in his Bible after we lost Cody. He said, and he wrote several letters to God that he didn't show us, but he said, "Dear God, I love you. I come to you tonight to talk to you and ask you for some things. Lord, after tonight's message, I have become clearer of what you desire of me. Lord, I want your will to be done. I'm tired of not being the child I should be. I am tired of my will taking control of my life. I beg you, Lord, to convict my spirit. I want to read my Bible, Lord, just as you would have me read your Bible. I want to have the most intimate relationship with you, Lord. I want your will to be done in my life. I do not want my will to ruin my life. I want to be your right-hand man here on this earth, Lord. I want to win lives over for you, Lord. I want so much for a godly relationship and not a relationship of temptation. I want the bravery to take up for you in any case whatsoever. I want this worldly desire to come to an end, a complete stop. It's not about me. It's about my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So, God, I'm asking you right now to convict my spirit, Lord, and let your will take my life over, and for my will to come to an end. You have blessed me with so much, Lord, an awesome family, a great church, a Christian brother. You are an awesome God. I want and ask earnestly, dear God, for you to convict my spirit. So I will have a great desire to read my Bible and to have most intimate relationship with you, Lord. I love you, Lord. Take over my life, and may your will be done. TTYL, Lord, sincerely with heart, Cody Henderson. TTYL, I didn't even know what that meant. Susanna didn't tell me. He was phenomenal. I'd go past his room when he was 16 years old, and he'd be on his bed every night with his Bible. He'd have it open, he'd be reading. He'd come talk to me about songs, and, man, Dad, you got to hear this, you got to hear this, you got to hear this. I was still at McDonald, and he was here, but he was a big part of here. And he was a big part of, he did do this. He was 15. He became a really good football player. He requested his football team to quit using God's name in vain, and they did. He wasn't afraid to stand up for God. If he saw somebody being bullied, he was only 5'8", but you didn't want to mess with him. I can promise you that. If he saw you being bullied, he was there for you. He wasn't going to put up with that. He was a good kid. And he worked for me. I had a lumber yard, and he worked one morning. He went and worked out at 5:30. He won the state powerlifting championship when he was 17 in the state of Louisiana. He was stout as a bull. And he worked for me at the lumber yard, but that morning he went and worked out at Cedar Creek on the weights at 5:30. At 10, he was back at the lumber yard working for me. He hauled lumber all day. At 1:30, he come to me and he said, "We have a scrimmage football game, Daddy, today down in Mangum." Excuse me. And he said, "I need to go." I said, "Okay, go. Be careful." So he took off, and he went and he played in that scrimmage football game. He got home about 5:30, and he walked in. He said, "I need to get a bath." His girlfriend was Christina Martin. She had been gone to something for a week, FBLA, and he had not seen her. And he said, "I'd like to see her tonight. She's been gone a whole week, but she's home." I said, "Okay." He said, "Can I stay an extra hour?" My son was always home at 11, and he didn't miss. And I said, "Yeah, you can stay an extra hour this evening." And so he got a shower, come in there, told us he loved us. He said that every day of his life, by the way. In our home, our children told us every single day of their life. When they went to bed at night, they'd come and tell us they loved us, or we would go and tell them we loved them, and they reciprocated, because it wasn't done in my household, so that was part of my plan with Susan. We will say "I love you," and we'll say it every single day of our lives in our family to each other, because you never know. Well, just so happens he come in that evening and told us he loved us, and he was headed out. We said, "Okay, be careful." And that evening, about midnight, I was still up in my office, And I knew he was supposed to be home at midnight. And about 5 after 12, Suzanne said, "Is Cody home?" She had already laid down, but it was just right in the next room right there. And I said, "No." She said, "He called?" And I said, "No," which was very unusual. He didn't come home late. And so at about 12:15, I'd called his phone numerous times, and every time I called, it had this crazy little thing he put on there, this laughter that was hilarious. And I finally told her, I said, "I'm going to go out Highway 4," because she lived in Weston. He'd come home on Highway 4. So I took off myself out Highway 4, and I got to where you could top the hill and see Nine Pines Hill way up there. And there was so many state troopers and sheriff's deputies and ambulances and everything there. It was unbelievable. All of the side going that direction was back all the way a mile. So I went down the other side, and man, it upset the cops. But I was trying to get to where this was going on, and the cop got on to me, stopped me. And I said, "I think that could be my son up there." He said, "What's his name?" I said, "Cody Henderson." He said, "Wait a minute." And he left. He came back, and Roger Young came with him. And he said, "Yeah, it's Cody, Johnny. He fell asleep, we think." So we lost him. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt. I'll tell all of you should wear one. He was in a car up here a long time ago before that, and he flipped. We was with Justin Martin, and Justin pulled out in front of a car right at the Barksdale Federal Credit Union. They got hit. Their vehicle went up in the air and come down on its top. Had he had on a seatbelt, he probably would have died in that accident. But he didn't, and he was able to get to Justin and get him out of his seatbelt and pull him out of the vehicle. And it was a bad deal. So he told me from then on, no matter what I'd tell him, he said, "I'm not wearing a seatbelt. If I'd have had a seatbelt on that day, I'd have died. But if he had a seatbelt on the day that he did perish, he probably wouldn't have." But so I'd say to all you kids, I just wear your seatbelt. Stick the thing on. Believe me, it's going to save your life 9 times out of 10. But anyway, the guy said, "Do you want to come down there?" I said, "No, I need to get back to his mom and sister." So I drove back fast as I could and got with Suzanne and let her know, and it was, that night was unbelievable. So unbelievable loss. I mean, to this day, I cannot drive out there without it taking my breath. When I pass through there, it takes my breath. And he was just an unbelievable kid. But 2 weeks before that, I'd had a talk with him one evening because I'd seen him at nighttime, and he'd be reading the Bible or doing whatever, but he'd be on the phone sometimes. And he did everything. He was a starter for the football team. He was on the powerlifting team. He was every church service that was open, he was here. He played bass guitar for the band. Had just started that. One night I told him, I said, "Cody, when I was 18, I fell asleep at the wheel coming home from a rig, and I should have been killed. I was by myself. I totaled a truck completely out, just annihilated it." I said, "You don't need to put yourself through as much as you are and get sleepy." Because he had called me one time when he was sleepy one night and said, "I'm sleepy. Can you talk to me till I get home?" I said, "Yeah." So I told him that night, I said, don't keep doing what you're doing. You're burning the candle at both ends. It's not that you're doing anything wrong, but you're burning the candle at both ends, and you're going to get tired one night and you're going to fall asleep at the wheel. And he said, "No," he said, "if you want me to quit something, I'll quit football, but I'm not quitting." He thought that I was wanting him to quit playing in the church band. I wasn't asking him to quit anything. I was asking him to go to sleep at night. When you lay down at 10, don't talk to your girlfriend till 1. Go to sleep. And that's what I told him. He said, "I'll do that." He said, "You're right, I'll do that." 2 weeks later, the very thing that I talked to him about happened. And, like I say, God's with us. And I can truthfully tell you that as horrible as it was, that night, these people were at my house. Within 1 hour, my house was packed with people. It wasn't not a dry. So many people loved him. But they were there with us. They were there to support us as Christians. And God got us through that. Again, it was not easy, but I look back on that, and You know, the deal is, would you rather had him for 17 and a half years, or would you rather just not had him at all? No, I promise you, I'd have missed out if I hadn't had him for that 17 and a half years, because it was incredible. It was a wonderful ride. My son was perfect in my eyes. He wasn't, but in my eyes, he was. But you got to realize and move on from those things, because you got to understand, God put me here for a reason. It wasn't me that died in that car wreck. And I knew that we still had Wendy. And I just knew what I was supposed to do. I had to be there for Wendy. I had to see. Wendy was 12. Wendy went through a year of not grieving because of me and her. We didn't know that, but we found out because she finally lost it after a year. But she tried to not grieve for us. She didn't want us hurt anymore. But Wendy's a super person. She's a praise and worship leader. She loves the Lord. And she's had us 2 beautiful granddaughters. We didn't think we was going to get any. She told us we wasn't. She said, I'm selfish and I'm not having kids. I just got to tell you up front, it ain't happening with me. But she decided to, and so we've been blessed with that. And we've been blessed in so many other ways, and I'm not even going to get into that tonight. But God's blessed me every step of my life after I chose to walk with him. But the biggest thing in all of that was whenever I did my situation with, I couldn't give my tithe when I was early 20s. I couldn't give up that money. God talks to us about that. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't give up that money. And I kept telling Suzanne, she'd say, we need tithe. I'd say, no, we ain't got the money to tithe. She'd say, well, if we pay our tithe, we can't pay this. And I'd say, no, you pay that. God ain't going to give me a bad credit score, but that guy is, so pay him. And she kept telling me, you're doing the wrong thing, Johnny, because you have to have faith in God. It's not the money. That's how I seen it, though. That's all I saw was the money. Now, if I could say anything to y'all tonight, it's about the one thing, and that is the faith. Because if you have faith, then you have the love. And if you have the love, you got it all. If you can ever get to that love part that Jesus carried around with him, that was awesome, then you got it all. Could you give me a napkin? And I couldn't do it. I kept telling her, no, we're not going to pay it. So after about a year, a friend of mine knew how interested I was. This ain't about tithing, but that's where we're going with it. A friend of mine knew how interested I was in the stock market. So he brought me a tape, and he said, listen to this tape today when you go to Monroe to work. And, oh man, okay, I'll listen. He said it's 30 minutes long. It's John Templeton. He's talking about the stock market, and it's phenomenal. I was interested in the stock market, big time. Excuse me. So that morning I got in my car and I plugged that tape in. Tells you how long ago that was. It was cassette tape. And I was trucking along there, and John Templeton was talking about all the things in the stock market that were blowing and going, like microwave oven. He said, man, who'd ever dreamed you could stick a tater in a black box on a countertop, and in 5 minutes you'd have a baked potato. He said, but that's the microwave oven. And if you'd have invested in microwave ovens, you'd be rich. He said, who'd ever believe you could pick up a phone in a car and call somebody? That's cell phones, and they're coming out. They hadn't really come out yet, but they had come out to people that could afford $10,000 from one, but I wasn't in that category by no means. And so, but it just got me going. I was listening to that, and I got fired up. Now, John Templeton is a Christian, and I'm talking about a very devout Christian man. That didn't really get in here until this. And I was about to hear this, and he said, I know you want to know the thing that will give you the biggest return, period. He said, so get something to write with, and I'm going to tell you, and you can write it down. I pulled over on the side of the road because I want to write it down. And so he paused, and he came back, and he said, tithing to God 10% is the greatest investment you will ever make. And God, at that moment, absolutely spoke to me. And he said, Johnny, it took you listening to someone other than me to convince you to do what you should already be doing. I don't want your money. I want your faith to give me that money. And that's what it's all about. It's not about your money. when it comes to tithing, and I don't mean this about tithes, I'm sorry I even bring it up, but that's where I got my faith, people. I realized right then it wasn't about the money, it was about the faith that was strong enough to do it. And I drove home. I turned the vehicle around, drove home, and I went in tears and told Suzanne, from this day forward, we'll tithe 10% to God, and we will give in addition to that, period. I do not care what the bills say. I do not care what the creditors say. I don't care. You're to tithe 10% off every nickel we make, period. Well, we did. And I got to tell you, and I'm not going to get off into that because we need to go eat. The money started coming in from all over the place. It didn't matter what I did. I made money. I mean, God was putting things in me. Do this, Johnny. Do this. And I started making money like you can't imagine in various things in business. I've been blessed, truly, truly blessed when it comes to that. And so it's about faith. And that's what it's about too when it comes to loss. It's your faith in God. It's how strong your faith is. Can you handle it? You can if your faith is strong enough. Because he said nothing is too much. He's with you. Nothing is too much. And so I would say that tonight to everybody, that work on your faith with him. Believe in him when he tells you, if I feed the birds from the air, will I not feed you? He's trying to tell you, you're not going to go hungry. I'm going to be there for you. You're not going to go without. I'm going to be there for you. And if you truly follow him and invest in him and have that faith in him and love him, well, he's going to do way more than that. He's not just going to feed you like the birds in the air. He wants more for you than that, I promise you.